With the release of Alpha 3.20, Star Citizen's latest racing ship has come screaming to the forefront of the race scene. I was incredibly lucky to get some great flight time in it before the launch, thanks to Officer Rondog from Atmo Esports. I also got the opportunity to speak to some of the very fastest racers in the verse to get their opinion on this ship, the people you can really trust when it comes to racing. So, the other Fury variants launched with much fanfare, but as pilots got acquainted with the ship, the inconvenience of loading and carrying around a snub ship reared its ugly head once again. I've yet to see a Fury out in the wild. The LX, however, launches as a purpose-built ship, not to be carried around as a snub fighter or a missile boat to pull out when you need it, but rather a shiny toy you only bring out when you know you're headed to the track. So as the first ship to launch with absolutely no weaponry and zero utility, has the sacrifice really been worth it? And is this a ship that you should be adding to your hangar? Welcome to Ship Scrutiny, Fury LX. Hello folks, Space Tech here, and welcome to a ship review and buyer's guide for the newest ship from Mirai. Through this video, I will be comparing it to how it performs in comparison to the base variants, as well as the P52 and P72, the comparable snub ships from Kruger. If you've been to my channel before, you know I'm here to give you all the info you need, so feel free to jump around to sections that interest you the most. Starting off with the tour. As with the other variants, the first thing that immediately strikes you is how small the Fury is. Even beside other ships in the same size class like the 100i, the Fury does truly feel diminutive. I also have a full showcase of all the paints you can apply to the Fury at the end of this video, in case you're interested to see how the different liveries apply to the base paints already available. Right away, we're drawn to the back, where you can see these gorgeous new lights. These lights even blink yellow if the Fury has its gear down and is landed. In the center, we have a size 1 power plant. Next, you have the gimbaled thrusters, the unique selling point of the Fury lineup. These thrusters are advertised to allow you to deploy the main thrusters in any direction you choose. Moving along exposes our size 1 shield gen and a size 1 cooler. Finally, we have our radar, and a relay that I assume will be used for engineering gameplay down the line. Of course, this brings us to the brand new wingtips. Here, we see that Mirai has stripped the Fury of its weapons and missiles. In its place, it's added these awesome looking wingtips, reminiscent of an F1 car or the spoiler on the Razor. You also have an extra thruster on each wingtip. Because thrust in Star Citizen actually comes from the physical thrusters on the ship model, these thrusters are going to articulate to provide additional strafe and maneuvering thrust, but we'll get deeper into that a bit later. Moving down the left side, we have our ground fuel access. This fuel port is actually independent of the one on top of the Fury. While the one on top is used to refuel from a Starfarer, I imagine this ground port is intended for use by ground crew aboard its mothercraft, like a Liberator or a C2. Moving on, we have avionics, another size 1 cooler, and our life support. Once again, we see CIG putting in some thought around the future of the game. One day, I expect to see an oxygen generator of some sort here. Also, seeing some reference to engineering gameplay is exciting, because these ships will require less attention and work to be done to them once these game systems come online. On the left side, we also get access to 60,000 micro SCU of cargo, just enough for you to stop and change clothes, or carry some extra food and water with you on a track day. Of course, the Fury being a snub means that you won't be very far from your carrier ship at any given time, so I treat this largely as a quality of life feature. Finally, that brings us to the cockpit of the vehicle. Like its sister variants, the Fury offers best-in-class visibility. This visibility is only accentuated by eye and head trackers like Tobii or Shrek IR, common tools for those who regularly top the leaderboards of these tracks. These tools can also be used to look left and right to make sure you're not going to crash into a fellow racer during a heated race. As with almost all of the recently released ships, the attention to detail in the design is fantastic. If I could change something, I would say that the LX variant could have benefited from a reduction in size or even a complete removal of the MFDs. To me, this ship will serve zero purpose in any sort of combat, so anything that could be done to improve the visibility even more would be a welcome change. Having access to no weaponry really reinforces that this ship will only serve to be hangar decoration unless you really plan on doing some serious racing. So how does the Fury LX stack up against the competition? Of course, the flashiest number is top speed. The entire Fury lineup tends towards the bottom of the racing ships when it comes to this stat. The Fury LX has a top speed of 1290, compared to 1400 on the Razor LX and 1340 on the P72. That being said, top speed is rarely achieved and relevant when you're screeching around the turns of most tracks. The LX does have a slightly better pitch, yaw, and roll than the other Furies, but still falls behind the Razor and far below the Kruger ships. Where the LX does excel is in raw thrust. Sitting more than 5 Gs above the Archimedes and the Razor in all vectors, the Fury LX allows you to throw it in any and all directions at the drop of a dime. This is where I referenced the expertise of some pro racers that I've raced with in the past. They mentioned that the LX seems to completely ignore the air around it, and instead cuts through it as if it was flying in space. This means that it takes corners differently, as it has less drag and less lift. It also means that it controls quite differently to the other racing ships. In their opinion, the Fury LX would be perfect for someone who wants to try out racing in a ship that doesn't quite control like the rest of the lineup, but rather one that defies gravity in its own way. As a ship that tends to ignore aerodynamics, it serves well during low flying, where your nose is often pointed towards the ground. So low flying and a unique flight pattern are definitely the strengths of the Fury LX, unlike combat of course. In combat, the Fury LX finds itself at the very bottom of the pile. Even ignoring its lack of weaponry, the LX comes stock with one size 1 shield. This shield provides the ship with 1350 HP. You could upgrade this shield to the FR66, which will bring the shield HP up to 1725, but every serious racer will tell you that everything other than one cooler and your power plant is just excess weight that you do not need during a race. The LX also sheds about 1000 kgs from its weight, but it does so at the cost of some hull HP as well. It loses 3600 total hull HP, but the true cost comes in the HP for each wingtip. The Furies heavily rely upon their wings to keep them in the air or moving correctly, and while the base Fury and the MX have 340 HP per wing, the LX only has 240. Realistically, all the Furies have a hull made of toilet paper. The LX is just one ply. All of this ignores the biggest issue. The Fury LX is a snub ship with no quantum drive. This means that you will always need to be carrying this around with you in a larger and more expensive ship. Of course, you can fit the Fury in almost any larger ship, including the Nomad. It's just another step to take when you inevitably eat dirt while pushing the limits around a track. While this isn't a big deal the first time, reclaiming both ships, then moving them one at a time off the pad, and finally loading them up can take you an extra 3 to 5 minutes per death, which really adds up over the course of a race session. Now, if you do have access to a respawn ship like the Carrack or the 890 Jump, that time can get cut down pretty significantly by carrying a mini fleet of Furies on board the ship. The Carrack can comfortably fit 5 inside its hangar, and the 890 close to 12 from what I've seen. Even still, all the time spent claiming and loading up the Furies in the first place should definitely be accounted for. Compare this to having something like the Razor LX, which you reclaim and are immediately good to go in. A worthwhile consideration. So let's say you've been sold. You don't quite enjoy the current racing ships and want to try something new. What are your options? Well, the price of the Fury LX is $55, or $50 for the Warbond edition that comes with the little serial number on the side, as well as LTI. While this isn't the worst ship to use as an LTI token, this is a really tough sell as a standalone ship. For some context, this is $25 more than the starter ships, and $20 more than a P-72 Archimedes, arguably one of the best racing ships in the game. For $10 less, you can get access to ships like the C8X and the Cutter, amazing all-rounder ships that give you access to a lot of gameplay. By far the biggest issue is that these snub ships are usually extremely cheap in game. For example, the P-72 is only 150,000 aUEC, and the P-52 is even less. This is so little in game that it would almost never be worth it to purchase the Fury or any other snub ship with money on the pledge store once it's purchasable in game. Of course, the larger 2, 3, and 6 packs of the LX really just make no sense. These ships have an incredibly short claim timer, which means you can simply spawn multiple of them at a pad in the case that you want to share your LX with friends. So all in all, I'd recommend this ship to be purchased off the pledge store only if you have the spare credit lying around, or are a full-time racer who really enjoys the way the Furies fly. Please like and or subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Once again, a huge thank you to Officer Rondog, who streams at his Twitch linked in the description down below, and Atmo Esports for footage and access to the LX. Take care and see you in the next one. Okay, these paint liveries are awesome. Where'd I put my wallet?